Welcome to the Wisdom of Women show. We are dedicated to amplifying the voice of women in business. A new model of leadership is emerging, and we are here to amplify the voices of women leading the way. I am your host, Coco Salmon, 5-time founder, impact investor, and creator of the Force for Good system. Thank you for joining us today as we illuminate the path to unlocking opportunities and prosperity for women-led enterprises by amplifying the voice and wisdom of women. Today, we have a trailblazing vagipreneur in our midst. Rachel Braun Scherl is a vagipreneur and business builder who has spent over 30 years helping brands from global powerhouses like Johnson Johnson and Pfizer to bold venture-backed startups drive top-line growth with purpose. As co-founder of Spark Solutions for Growth, she has become the go-to strategist for companies aiming to innovate and scale in women's health from menstruation to menopause. She made waves as president of Embrace Laboratories, where she helped create a new category of female sexual wellness and chronicled this journey in her best-selling book, Orgasmic Leadership. Got my copy right here, and you need to get one too. Today, she is the co-host of Business of the V, a first-of-its-kind podcast exploring the business and health intersection of women's sexual and reproductive well-being. A sought-after speaker, Rachel had shared her insights on CNN and South by Southwest and Stanford, and continues to mentor the next generation of founders shaping the future of women's health. I could not be more honored and pleasured to be here with you today, Rachel. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for that incredibly gracious and generous introduction. One of the things that's so funny, when you talk about wisdom of women, is we met sitting next to each other at a meeting where we didn't get a chance to talk, and we shared a cab uptown in New York City and immediately saw a connection in terms of how we think and our energy and our enthusiasm. So it's just a pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, it is. And this is what we need to do more of, right? Help each other connect and talk about the good stuff that we're creating in the world. So I'd love to know, as we get started, what is a book written by a woman that has significantly influenced your life?
Well, there's so many. As I was thinking about speaking to you, there's one book and there's one author, and I want to share them together. So when I went to sleepaway camp for the first time, I didn't love being away from home. I was quarantined in the infirmary with chickenpox. So you can imagine I'm on a campus with hundreds of kids, and the last thing they wanted me to do was get anyone else sick. And it turns out that Judy Blume, who is my favorite author, her daughter was a camper, and she found out that there was a camper in the infirmary who was obsessed with her. She was so sweet, and she signed my book, and I kept that book. I was 10 years old, and now I'm many decades older. I always kept that book wherever I moved, when I went to college, when I got married, when I moved from house to house, when I had my kids, wherever I went, I always had that book. The book was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which had an impact because it was the first time I read a book that allowed you to think about, who am I? Where do I fit in? How do I question, all these complicated feelings you start to have as a preteen and a teenager. And I also just felt so special that in this scary time when I was by myself with no parents staring into space because there were no TVs at camp, I had this person who came and spent that time with me. Fast forward 40 years later, I go to hear Judy Blume and her son speak about a movie they co-produced. And I have my book with the purple cover, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, in my bag, and I see Judy Blume get up to go to the bathroom. And I follow her, which sounds sort of creepy. I get it, but it was, well lit, and I didn't look that scary. And as she was washing her hands, I said, so sorry to interrupt. I just have to tell you, I have this book. I tell her the story. It's always had an impact on me. I've carried it with me for 40, 45 years. She then goes back to the stage after going to the bathroom and says, one of the things that's so great about being an author is that you meet people in the strangest places who tell you what an impact you had. So it was a combination of that book and her connection to me, or my feeling that I had some sort of connection to her. I've read every book that she's ever written, as she went from children to preteen to your first sexual experiences to adult relationships. So I would say that combination of that author and book were so informative. I wound up writing a few articles about it. One was called Are You There, Judy Blume? It's Me, Rachel. And then I read another book called A Little Life by Hanya
Yes.
Yanagihara, which was
Very,
really these relationships of these young men who came from such different backgrounds and experienced such trauma and had such unbelievable resilience and unconditional love for one another. And I somehow put those two things together. Like, here's the first time you ask questions, and here are the people in this book, A Little Life, the kinds of people that you want to make sure you have around you when life gets tough. And the experiences that the people had in this book were just tragic. Man, sexual abuse, violence, violation, and all kinds of horrible things. What kept them together were the strength of these relationships. I finished the book sitting in an airport. I used to write for Huffington Post, and I was writing an article about it. I was so moved finishing the book, bawling, like sitting in a busy airport on a Saturday afternoon, because it so had an impact on me. And that's a really consistent theme for me, the power, strength, and the importance of relationships, whether it's a relationship with yourself, meeting the author who gave you that introduction, or even reading about these characters. All I wanted to do was interview the author of this to see what was in your life experience that you were able to create this trauma and this beauty.
oh my goodness. Wow. There's so much to unpack here, Rachel. First of all, I would love it if you'd send me links to the two articles you mentioned. I'd love to
Absolutely.
put those in the show notes and read the articles. And really, what unbelievable books you are bringing to the table, because I remember being a young girl, sort of 12, 13 years old, reading Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And then I also read, I think it was last year that I read This Little Life. And it was just, it is one that stays with you. It is tragic. But these relationships, I love how you framed it, that we need to make sure that we have these kinds of relationships in our lives. I love that. I didn't know that you had written for Huffington Post either. You were so impressive to me.
You're so,
I just love,
as a 5-time founder and impact investor and amazing human.
I just love meeting extraordinary women who are kind and generous and fun and smart and doing cool things. And I feel like that's you.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to know about 3 experiences in your life that have shaped who you are. We all have those moments that bring out our resilience, our courage, that make us realize we're worthy. I'd love to hear some of your stories.
And again, when we had spoken previously to prepare for this, it really gets you thinking about the books that had an impact on you or the experiences. It makes you reflect. And I happen to be quite self-reflective. And, my dad, who was my greatest hero, who's been gone about 8 years, I refer to him and I tear up. So me crying in the airport in the middle of the afternoon is not that unusual. I started thinking about all of them, and a couple really generally always spring to the top of the pile. One didn't involve my dad. I was 9 years old and I was skiing with my mom and my sister. She was older and I was a very beginner skier. My mom put me on a chairlift with a woman who we met at the place we were staying, who was a much better skier. They had one of these things where you have a midway station where you're supposed to get off if you want to get off for the easier terrain, and you stay on if you want to go to the top. So my mother and sister are in front of me. I see them lean forward. They get off at the midway station. I lean forward. The woman I'm with leans forward. She gets off and I don't get off.
Oh, no.
So I'm sitting on this chairlift, and in my recollection, I was 10,000 feet in the air over this cavernous bowl. God knows I could have been 20 feet in the air, but this is what my recollection was. I go all the way to the top. And I remember having a very clear vision that I couldn't shut the safety bar because I would slide under it, as opposed to keep the safety bar up and you can fall out anywhere.
Right.
I get to the top. I meet a ski patrol named George. He never saw him again. Takes me down very difficult terrain, all black diamonds. I was really uncomfortable. He talked me down the whole way. I get to the bottom and I'm kind of shaking. I could see my mother from the top of the chairlift. She was on the ground, terrified, watching me. I get there and I said I was done. I wanted to go home. My mom said, "You're getting on this chairlift again. You're skiing again, or you'll never ski again." And I did. And I have skied. And it literally became sort of a metaphor I used anytime I faced something hard about getting back on the horse or failing. It was a simple thing. I wasn't doing anything important. I kind of did something stupid by leaning forward and not even getting off the chairlift. It said, like, you have to persevere. And that's nothing like the characters in the book. I'm not pretending that I cured cancer or anything like that. But as a 9-year-old, the idea that you were so terrified and that you could actually do something when you were terrified really made an impact on me. Years later, when I read Brené Brown, Daring Greatly, she had this expression in the book that I think of with that. She said, if you're not feeling uncomfortable every day, you're not trying hard enough. I just thought that's such a great way to harness fear or anxiety and turn it into something with purpose. That was one that I wrote in every college essay, every business school essay. Probably not so impressive now while people are building global nonprofit organizations from their bedroom when they're 12. But at the time, that was very impactful. The second one wasn't just one experience. It was something that happened all the time. And I'm not, again, pretending that all we did at home was talk about Shakespeare, but the story of Hamlet, one of his advisors is Polonius, who was a character of questionable character. His son is getting on a ship and sailing off to a new world. And his father gives him a speech, which has been made fun of a lot. But my dad would say there were things in it, neither a borrower or lender be, to thine own self be true. It was basically like, take care of business, harness your strength, be your own person, don't rely on other people, be strong, and go do what it is you were supposed to do. And the shorthand became, every time I was going to do something new or that felt hard or scary, my dad would say, do you need a Polonius? And just that exchange would be like, no, I get it. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, don't take any wooden nickels, don't be fooled, take care of yourself, worry about your own self and your own money. It became this metaphor for how I thought about going into new experiences. I would say the last one, there are so many, and many are personal, but from a business perspective, when I was working with my co-founder and my business partner of 20 years, Marianne, raising money for my first women's health company and going into venture capital offices, and we had 13 meetings in 2 days in Silicon Valley. And we go into the first 2 meetings and they're asking us questions and we give them serious answers. This is why it's different from Viagra, a product that improved arousal, desire, and satisfaction for women of all ages and life stages. And they would say, how is this different? And we talk about, the male sexual response being like a hydraulic pump system, and gave the scientific explanation. And we got, blank. And you're an investor and you raise money, and the only thing you want is to get to the next meeting.
Yeah.
So if no one's asking questions, and even worse, if no one is speaking, you're dead in the water. We go into the second meeting and they say, well, you did this survey about satisfaction. How does it affect his satisfaction? And we talked about how it really was focused on her satisfaction. And we believe anecdotally that he experienced more satisfaction for this, that, or other reasons. Blank stares. We hear people whispering about their high school prom dates and they threw some girl over the roof of the car. Offensive things in any setting, but certainly in a business setting. So we go out between meeting 2 and 3 out of 13, and we sort of put our heads together and we say, this is not working. No one's asking us questions. No one's asking anything strategic. No one's asking us how we're going to grow the business. We are not getting to a next meeting, which means we're not going to get any money. So let's try something totally different. So I look in my wallet and I happen to have $100 bill. The only reason that's relevant is I never have any cash. I track everything. I could tell you what I spent on groceries in June of 2017, what I spent on clothing in November of 2008. No one cares. No one ever looks at it, including me, but I could do it. So I had this $100 bill. And so it gave us this idea. We start talking, we put our heads together, and we come up with this plan. Being direct and being businesslike and talking about women's health and sexual satisfaction like it's any other business is not working. We're going to have to change the energy in the room. So we go into the third meeting. I have the $100 bill. I slam it on the desk, and I say, here's a $100 bill. If anyone asks us a question about the category that we don't know, this $100 is yours. If someone makes a double entendre that we haven't heard again, $100 is yours. If someone makes a sexual joke or innuendo that we haven't heard or that makes us turn red, this $100 is yours. Then pregnant pause for all the obvious reasons. And then I said, she likes it more. She wants to have it more. Let's talk about the business model. And this was a different kind of silence. This was, holy cow.
Yeah.
These people are for real.
Yeah.
They're serious people talking about serious business and an opportunity to make serious money. And I had to point out the elephant in the room. And I point out in the book, and that's where it got its title, that was the moment I felt like an orgasmic leader, where I felt like I could take some control of the conversation. Because one of the biggest issues in building women's health companies historically has been we don't have the language, we don't have the experience, we don't have the vocabulary. It felt like a moment where I said, I have a voice, I have a vocabulary, I have a way into and around these difficult conversations. The great end to that story would have been we left that third meeting with $10 million. It wasn't that meeting, but we ultimately raised 20 million plus in venture capital and some debt and went on to build a company.
That is just extraordinary. I mean, okay, so you just told us 3 incredible stories. First of all, the 9-year-old skiing with mom. I know exactly how you feel because I'm not a great skier and I have terror when I've had situations where I find myself on a black diamond and it is terrifying.
What am I doing here?
Yeah, how did I ever land here? And how am I going to get myself out of it?
Exactly.
I do think there's so much power that we gain by remembering times when we were courageous. I call it cultivating courage. We remember how courageous we are. We remember that we can do hard things. We remember that we were terrified and thought we were going to die, but we didn't.
We didn't die.
We didn't die. Right? And it's okay. We were okay. I feel like there's so much about life in there because as we live life, there are those who live life afraid to do the hard things or the scary things or the embarrassing things. And there are those who just say, I know that it's going to suck a little bit. I need to get down the hill.
Scott Hamilton, who is this great skater, who I'm sure you've heard of, who won Olympic medals and battled cancer 4 times. There was a great article about him in the New York Times when he was sort of passed over and they replaced him with a new generation of commentators. And they had Tara Lipinski and Johnny Weir. Very different style, very different generation. And they interviewed him and he said, like, how do you feel? Like, do you feel like a failure? Do you feel like your life is over? He said, I recovered from cancer. I was a sick kid. I'm an Olympic medalist. I've fallen 41,000 times and I've gotten up 41,001 times. And I just think it's so true, as I'm sure you've experienced in business. It's not how you perform when things are going well or your relationships are great and, your kids are well and you're on a streak. It's what happens when you're faced with adversity. And I think that's why the book, A Little Life, was telling, whatever the expression was, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I feel like that's what defines you and your character and your ability to accomplish things, whether personal, professional, or financial, whatever your metric is.
Yeah. And then you told about Polonius, and there's a couple of things I love about this. I love that these were the conversations you were having at your dinner table. It inspires me as a parent to make sure I'm having those kinds of in-depth conversations. What a gift that is.
You also did quote Animal House as a life guide.
Of course, as any good family does, just make sure you're having those conversations. You're really thinking. It's so, I don't know. I have a 23-year-old and I have a 17-year-old. And if you let yourself, you can let those moments slip by. You can refocus your lives onto whatever the topics of the day are rather than having rich conversations about the hard choices they are needing to make in their own
Yeah.
lives, or that we're making in our own lives.
And you use the expression so well. I had a life-threatening accident 20 years ago where I broke everything and was hospitalized and couldn't drive for 6 months. I remember thinking and saying to my kids, who were 9 and 5 at the time, I'm thinking of times where I felt brave. And other times when I felt brave, I'm going to use that feeling to try to feel brave now. And I used to use the same thing when they were facing something hard. Here are some of the hard things and challenging things you've done. Remember how that felt and use that here. It helped that they were competitive athletes. I grew up watching every sports movie come from behind training scene and all of that. Just that feeling of believing that you can do something is really an unbelievable feeling. I don't always have it. I don't think anybody does, but at least having a well to call on when you're feeling like your resources are a bit depleted is really important.
And then you talked about raising money and your company that you co-founded, and I assume that's Embrace Laboratories that you're talking about. Please tell us about that. What I loved about your story, lots of things, but your ability to pivot, to schedule all those meetings really quickly, which I think is what you have to do whenever you're raising money, but doing sales, like looking for new
Everything
business,
sale. Everything.
right? It's that getting in there and taking a swing, and learning, and not making it crumble you that they're not saying yes, but learning from it, finding what's working, what's not working, and knowing the first time you go out and take a swing, it's not going to be your best swing, right?
And then add being a middle-aged woman at the time, now a first-time founder to them. I had run a successful services business for many. The investors did that. That was revenue generated by revenue growth. So they didn't think that was a good analogy. And the third that I'm talking about, vaginas. You have to take a lot of blows to the head when you're doing something like that.
Tell us about Embrace. What is it? Tell us the story.
The product still exists. The core product of the business, we bought a technology behind a product that was a patented blend of botanical oils and extracts that was clinically proven to increase arousal, desire, and satisfaction. Through a complex set of circumstances, originally we met them thinking we would consult. It was very clear that they needed to raise money. They had 165 individual shareholders on their cap table. You learn very quickly what a nightmare that is. We just stayed very intrigued, and we had been doing work for decades, building brands, as you mentioned, for J&J and Pfizer and Merck and Bayer and Allergan and fill in the blank. But this kept staying in our mind because it was a product that solved the problem. There had been 35 active clinical programs at the time, 33 of which had been discontinued. There was no vocabulary to talk about arousal, desire, and satisfaction for women. At that point, only 3 to 5% of obstetricians and gynecologists even talk to their patients about sexual satisfaction. We were so intrigued that when the asset became available, we found a way with a VC partner to buy the asset and build a company around it. We did a lot of amazing things. We really started the conversation. We were the first people to speak and shout publicly about the disparity between men and women's advertising and large companies versus small companies. And this argument you still hear today, how we were blocked. We went to 100 different media outlets, online, website, radio, TV, cable network. And 95 said, no, we won't take your money to run your ads. And after a year and a half of that and sitting in lawyers' offices at networks, and from being in business, the last thing investors want to spend money on is legal fees. After a year and a half of that, we said, is there a way, if we can't buy media, that we can earn it? So we started this campaign to talk about this disparity between men and women's advertising and how we couldn't get anyone to approve our products. We couldn't get people to take our money to run our ads, which were talking heads, not sexual in nature. This was the same time Viagra is running ads on CBS at 5 p.m. during the Super Bowl. We couldn't get our ads on Lifetime. So when I'm sure no 12-year-old boys were watching. And so it really became, not just a challenge to build a business, but to be heard. And I don't mean that, in a one-to-one relationship way, but you couldn't have any product growth if you couldn't tell people about this product. And what we experienced is that when we were in one-on-one or 1 to 1,000 situations, it was like we were stampeded, like we were at a Who concert. When we got the message in front of the right people, and we didn't have that freedom to do that through social media, it mattered. And we built the company around PR. So we had some immense highs. We had some immense lows. When we sold the business in 2013, we were in 2,000 Walmarts and had built a direct-to-consumer company. Walmart said to us, we created a new package for them because of the way they look at shopping patterns. We created a smaller package because they wanted people to come back and replenish and increase the value of their market basket. They literally said to us, we will take the product, but when you advertise, never mention anywhere that the product is available in Walmart. So even when we were winning, we were still fighting these incredible headwinds, which so many businesses face today.
Give us a timeline. When was this happening?
So we bought the asset in 2008. We started this campaign about the disparity in 2010. We started to get traction in 2011. We sold the business in 2013. So this was before women's health was on everybody's lips. And there were a lot of challenges. No one sold this and bought a yacht after. It wasn't that kind of exit. What it did do is, because I had this opportunity to be the voice and face of the company, I wound up doing a lot of speaking in response to this business challenge. It turned out that seemed to be effective for the business and for me and my brand. And I've continued to do that and had it be an on-the-side revenue stream ever since, talking about growing businesses and hard to talk about categories, the business side of women's health, leadership, entrepreneurship, the challenge of being a female leader in a category that people aren't comfortable talking about. When we were hiring people, we would say, listen, we talk about vaginas. We say the word clitoris. If that's not something you can get your head around, that's okay. But then this business isn't for you. We don't have time in a startup to undo centuries of cultural discomfort to get you comfortable talking about that. But we did focus on, is there a way with humor and with accessibility to get people to be having this conversation? And, now there are hundreds, thousands, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars and people in this space now focused on it.
It's amazing. You sort of broke open the whole area, the whole industry. Now the rest of us are able to walk through the doors that were very hard to open.
A bunch of us and a lot of very important voices, having spent my earlier part of my career in corporate. Women's health is the most collaborative community that I've ever been in. I think part of that is because it's hard, because at some point I did some primary research during COVID. I came into women's health because I saw a great business opportunity. Lots of people come into women's health because they had a medical problem, looked for a solution, didn't see one, created it and said, hey, there are a lot of other people with this problem. I'm going to build a business. But regardless of how you come in, at some point, you have to become that person storming City Hall, whether it's advocating for changing legislation, whether it's, fighting media outlets, whether it's making sure that you can say the word vagina on TV. Everybody has moments where you have to be passionate. What's interesting about this space is that as this category was being created, and we talk about women's health, just to clarify for people, the way we talk about women's health now, I used to talk about from menstruation through menopause or the entire range of sexual and reproductive health. So the current definition is things that affect women only, meaning you have to have biologically female organs to have a situation with your ovaries or your uterus or becoming pregnant or whatever the case they may be. And that doesn't have to do with how you identify, that has to do with your biological organs. Then the second, and there's been a lot of work, a lot of investment, a lot of conversation, a lot of growth in that space. The second one is things that affect women primarily, which are autoimmune diseases, migraine, dementia, Alzheimer's, lupus, breast cancer. Everybody has a brain, everybody has breast. There's nothing particularly female about it, but the 80% of the sufferers of autoimmune disease are women. That's the second category. We've done a lot less there. There's a lot more conversation and there's still a huge amount of work to be done. And the last category is things that affect women differently. And the biggest example there is cardiac health. 1 in 3 women die of cardiac disease. We don't know nearly as much about what the signs and symptoms are of women's cardiac health. There's now a lot more discussion about the scientific connection between the early experience of hot flashes and the potential cardiac disease that might be associated with it. And those are the 3 big buckets. As I've said, we've done well in the first one. We're doing okay in the second. And the third one is where we have the farthest to go. But with that almost consistent description, lots of people are using. Investors are using, founders are using, healthcare academics are using, practitioners are using, regulators are using. It's given us much more of a common vocabulary. And that's been one of the most exciting things in this space, is creating the conversations, because you can't even have a difficult conversation unless you have the vocabulary.
Right, right. So tell us, all right, you built this company, Sempre, you bought, which I love. I could sit and talk to you just about that. You decided to buy and co-invest with venture and build Sempre and then exit.
And then I said, wow, not a lot of people like talking about vaginas as much as I do. I'm going to stay in this space. So we basically then went back to consulting, which I still do. And I work with companies large and small, as you mentioned, venture back to large companies in that women's health landscape, who are focused on driving top line growth, which is basically, what do you need to do? What money do you need to raise? How do you need to position? What distribution partnerships do you need? What strategic partnerships do you need? What price do you need to offer these things at? What portfolio do you need to have to get people to buy your product or service? And so that's really what I focus on. And that could be working with the largest condom brand, or creating a new source of barrier non-hormonal contraception designed by women for women, which is something I've been working on for a number of years. So there's so much amazing technology. And when you talk about one of the other fundamental underpinnings for the book when I wrote it was based on a number, dozens of interviews with people with a broad range of backgrounds in different aspects of women's health, about how do you capitalize on existing trends, business trends, to build businesses. And one of the things that's so exciting, I mean, there probably is nothing bigger to happen to women's health than AI. And we use it as a throwaway, and we use it as, everybody's building on it. Half of the people don't understand what it means or what it can do. But what AI does, in very layman's terms, in women's health, is it gives you a database and a history of patient records and patient experience and test results that we don't have in traditional scientific research as it relates to women's health. You can now look at a breast tumor and compare it to millions of data points about what happens with breast tumors historically that look this way. AI has given us the data that we haven't collected because, as you know, women weren't included in clinical studies until 1993, and gender as an independent variable wasn't included in NIH-funded studies until 2016. We have this huge missing, I won't even say gap, like gaping wound of knowledge as it relates to women's health. AI is one of the things that is really transforming that.
It really does give us the ability to take the data that we already have and re-look at it, reanalyze, slice it and dice it by gender and see what we can discover. It's pretty extraordinary. Tell us, I'm on your mailing list and everybody needs to have your newsletter. I really feel like, as a woman, it's just fascinating. It's easy to keep up on what's happening in women's health, but you list out all these different opportunities available for women who might be making a career change. It's such a wonderful resource. So everybody should definitely go and get access to it.
So I have to give credit to the founder of that company, who is my dear friend and colleague, Jody Newhouser, who's also a serial founder like you. And she started a business called In Women's Health, which is the newsletter that you're referring to, which really was, as everybody now wants to do something that has purpose and work in women's health, it's really about how do we upskill the workforce. There are people who are switching from other careers. They might be academics who want to get into business. They might be physicians who want to take a more business-minded approach. And basically, it's about providing skills and resources to understand what it is in women's health, how to work in women's health, and how to get jobs. And one of the things that grew out of that Jody and I have loved doing is what we call the mini MBA in women's health. And we've done 4 cohorts so far. We've taken a couple hundred people through it. And basically, it's a very as deep a look as you can in 3 hours a week for 6 weeks on the systems and the infrastructures and systems that you need to understand in women's health. And, the premise is that women's health is a complex, overwhelming system of interwoven systems. So we spend 1 week on the history of care, and we do care delivery, financing, we do product development, we do regulatory, we do marketing, we do legal, so that at the end of 6 weeks, you know so much more about what the questions are you should be asking. And we also talk about if you're looking for a job in this aspect of women's health, here are the questions you should ask. If you're interviewing with a Series B company, this is what that means to be at that stage. And here are the kinds of questions you could ask. We are launching an even bigger organization, which we're excited about. We're still in stealth, so I will be definitely telling you about it. The concept is to create a revenue stream that fills the gaps where there isn't funding for women's health where there should be. So creating an organization through a unique model that has organizations underneath it that do lobbying, advocacy, and policy, write checks directly into organizations doing women's health research, and invest in companies. Because what you hear from so many people in this space is you're either looking for money, raising money, you're about to raise money, you're talking about money, you're trying to become profitable. And what we're trying to do is fill some of the gaps so that we can spend more time growing the ecosystem to everyone's benefit. Just to give one very, very simple example, and you've come from a healthcare services background, there's a lot of work now, a lot of it done by a brilliant physician, Dr. Jocelyn Fitzgerald, about the difference in reimbursement. So just giving simple headlines, a procedure that's done on a woman compared to the same procedure done on a man, when you can do, a head-to-head competition. So let's say, a vasectomy versus your tubes tied, things that eliminate your fertility for a man or a woman, that the procedures done on women are generally reimbursed 30 to 70% less. So think about that when you go into, and this is why it's this complex interwoven system of systems. Think about when the average woman goes in for her annual exam, why her physician, her OB or her gynecologist only has 7 minutes, because she has to see 30 patients a day, or he has to see 30 patients a day for the economics of keeping the lights of the office on. So we're not just talking about investing in companies. We're talking about how do you change the huge systemic barriers that influence our ability to deliver care. I will be from the rooftops telling you all about that when we're ready.
I can't wait, because I would love to get involved and support and be in. That sounds like an extraordinary platform, and you're so knowledgeable. The thing that I have loved about being in healthcare is not only is it impactful and touching lives and improving outcomes, it also became a place where I could advocate for others beyond just my own company. That has been so fulfilling for me. And I sense that this is common for you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, because you've had so much business success, it's naive to say there's no connection between having financial resources and the ability to make an impact. This large organization, which includes a women's health pack, which Jody and 2 other founders stood up last year, is that you're not even in the conversation, certainly in Washington, unless you have money. That's not to buy votes, but we all know the large lobbies going into all the Congress people's offices and making their voices heard and having an impact on legislation. There are so many things in women's health that either have not been addressed or have been addressed to our detriment that require us to have a voice. And for better or worse, you have to work in the system that exists. You have to have money to have the power. This organization that we're creating will give people of any background the opportunity to make a contribution. We're in stealth. We're going to be pushing it, shouting it literally from the rooftops, end of 3rd quarter, start of 4th quarter, and hope to have a huge organization by the end of next year. It really is to be able to be in the conversation and apply pressure and have leverage in the areas where it makes a difference.
Awesome. So you're starting a new platform. You also have your newsletter in women's health that you do with
We
Jody?
teach the MBA, and I spend most of my time doing strategy consulting and growth. I work with Jody on in women's health, teaching them mini MBA. I'm helping build this new company, and then I do a lot of speaking and thought leadership.
Amazing. So what would you tell? What would be like some guidance you would give to any founder, particularly a founder in a difficult market where doors are difficult to open, about scaling?
I now feel like we need a sleepover, but I'll just give a couple that have been particularly meaningful. The first is be prepared that it's going to be more exhausting, harder, more expensive, more aggravating, and take longer than you anticipate. And whatever list you make of the challenges that you might have, there will be ones you'll face that are not on that list. So you really have to have endurance, physical, emotional, and financial resilience. When I first got into the space, someone said a quote to me that really made a lot of sense. Entrepreneurship, and specifically entrepreneurship in women's health, is not for the faint of heart. If you have to make money tomorrow because you have premiums to pay for health insurance, this might not be for you. Entrepreneurship might not be for you, and that's okay. You don't have to start a company to make an impact. So that's number one. It takes longer, it's harder, it's more exhausting. The second is, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. There was a trend a couple of years ago, and maybe still, I'm curious your opinion on it. People only wanted to invest in founders who had failed. A bunch of things about failure. It stinks, it hurts. It matters what happens when you get up. There's nothing fun about it. But what I really think is, what happens when the chips are down? What happens when a door gets slammed in your face? What happens when you hear a no? Because if you give up, someone else will get your yes. It's a law of averages. In fundraising, you have to kiss a lot of frogs. I'm sure your listeners have read many stories. This person went to 87 investors. This went to 150 LPs. It's an incredibly time-consuming process. And if you give up, you are done.
You are done. Yeah.
You're done. The third is, you have to have ways to replenish your emotional bank account or your physical bank account. For me, that's exercise. It's watching classic comedies, anything laughter related. The last is, you have to have people that you can go to who build you up. One specific example: before I raised money for my first company, I was with a group of friends, including my closest friend, who is like a sister. I went to college and business school with her, always been a part of my life. And I was sitting around with her and a bunch of friends, and I said, listen, business school friends, we were out, I don't know how long we were out in business school. And I said, I'm not asking anybody for money. I'd never done that before. But I'm just saying, if I were asking for money about this business that I'm about to go into, that I just described to you, and you had the money, would you write a check? So I put all the caveats in. I'm not asking, you don't have to write me a check. I was really asking, do you believe in me?
Yeah.
And my closest friend at the time, who wasn't in a position to write a check at that time, said, if I had money, I would write you a check for $200,000. I didn't get the check for $200,000, but that conversation gave me the confidence to say, she's betting on me. When I was money, I had a family member who I did not ask for money. And I got a very large check in the mail, unsolicited, with a note that says, if I'm not going to bet on you, who am I going to bet on? And it's those things that, do I wish I had returned 100x their money? Absolutely. There are a lot of things that stand between you and a successful business. And along the way, you're going to hit many, many rough spots. I fail sometimes 20 times in the morning. And whatever it is you need to get you back up, whether it's people or exercise or humor or meditation, which has never been my thing, although everyone who ever meets me says I should do that. You have to have a way to build yourself up. This stuff is really hard. Life is hard. Life is hard when you have, your basic necessities cared for, or even more than your basic necessities. You don't know what's going to hit you. And you and I have talked about the unexpected things that happen to you in your personal life or in your professional life. You think about this CEO, and it was his own mistake. at Coldplay on the big screen. When he went to work that day, there was no way on his list he was thinking, I'm going to be publicly humiliated on a global stage, lose my job, and have a negative impact on my family.
Oh,
And now it matters whose fault it is. Like, could he have avoided that? Yes, probably. That's very different than, I remember working with a company, working with an investor who had his entire inventory wiped out by Hurricane Sandy. Like, there's nothing you can do. You cannot prepare for a once in a century storm, but there are plenty of things you can prepare for. And even when the ones that hit you that you aren't prepared for, you need to have some way to pull yourself up.
you do. You're absolutely right. You have to, I think the point of having the right people around, and sometimes it's not who you think. I actually thought you were going to say your best friend said, no, I would never. Because like a lot of times it is those friends who see you in a certain context or even family who are unwilling or who are worried about you. It reminded me of a difficult conversation I had with my mother when I was a couple years in with Illume, and it was really hard. She wanted me to give up.
And there's no punch like that than the people who love you the most telling you to give up.
Yeah, I was sitting in the car driving with her, and I lovingly said, I know you care about me, but I can't hear you say that.
Right.
I cannot hear you say that. I am all in.
Right.
Right. And she tightened right up, and then I never heard another word of it. By the way, you know about healthcare. I couldn't have just shut down. It was not an option. So your point.
I mean, there's no point once you start a venture that you're not emotionally involved. And I don't mean emotionally the way that it's used negatively against women, but when you have your full strength of your intellect and your passion and your energy, it's very hard to stop. And there's too many people and things riding on you. You are in charge of people's paycheck.
Yes. I had patience.
Saving their lives.
So it was not an option. We always said, failure is not an option. What's the answer? What's the next step? And I do believe that there's always something you can do. There's a next step, and it's something you have resources to do.
It might not get you to the outcome you want.
It never get you to the outcome you want, but you can always take a next step.
There's always something to do.
Yes, exactly. All right. So now a little bit of fun before we start to draw ourselves to our close, our fast fire round. I'm going to ask you 5 quick questions.
I love this.
To answer
I asked every interview candidate the 10 questions that were at the end of the actor studio, because they touch different stories. And I wanted to have some way for people to look at these folks next to one another and see what they had in common. So I'm ready.
Yes. First word that comes to mind when you hear the word orgasmic leadership. Courage. Boardroom, bedroom, or both?
Both.
The word people should say more often.
Vagina and victory.
Yay.
Or academically correct.
Podcast episode you wish every founder would listen to.
I listened to this podcast of one of the founders of Sequoia, who's now his job is just to be the wise man in the room. I never heard someone break down the thought process of a VC, the mind of an investor, what they're looking for, how futuristic and into the future they're looking, how close they are to trends, and their ability to put all those pieces together.
What was the show? Do you remember?
I will get it.
Don't worry. Well, you'll send it to me and I'll put it in
I
there.
will send it to my kids, send it to everybody. And it was just like, this guy is so smart.
Sequoia Capital. 3 words that sum up your mission.
Wellness, change, impact.
How can listeners and viewers learn more about you and your services?
The name of my company is Spark Solutions for Growth. I'm all over social media as Rachel Braun Scherl or RB Scherl. If you type in vagipreneur, I should be the only one who comes up. Someone else came up with the word, and then I got their permission to trademark it. And if you look up women's sexual health or reproductive health, hopefully you'll see me.
Awesome. I love that. So for all of our listeners, tune in to Rachel. because you'll learn so much. Pick up Orgasmic Leadership, the book. It's really a great read and will help you regardless of the type of business you're in. I feel like it's really a wealth of wisdom for any entrepreneur. The stories and featured companies and the founders that you talk about really it's such a wonderful book.
And I would just say that the work that you do and the way we met speaks to the power of being open-minded and asking questions and placing a high value on relationships.
Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate you being with us today on the Wisdom of Women show. It is a pleasure to hear your wisdom and find ways that you're illuminating new opportunities for women and for women's health. To all of our listeners, be sure to follow, like, and share the Wisdom of Women show on your favorite platform is to infuse more wisdom into your business. Take the Growth Readiness Quiz at aforceforgood.biz/quiz and uncover where your insight is needed most. The world is made better by women-led business. Let's all go make the world a better place.